Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Jacob Hawthorne had always trusted his instincts, but nothing could have prepared him for the moment he stumbled upon a secret that would fracture the foundation of everything he thought he knew. One evening, hidden in the shadows behind the grand staircase of the Marlowe estate, he overheard a hushed conversation between Madison and Leslie that chilled him to his core. The whispers were urgent, sharp with guilt and veiled menace. As Jacob strained to hear, the truth began to unfurl with every passing word. Madison, cold and calculated, was discussing a payment substantial, untraceable. Leslie's voice trembled, not with remorse, but with apprehension. She had followed through, she assured Madison, but there had been complications. Laura had survived the accident. Madison's tone turned icy. That hadn't been part of the plan. Jacob's breath caught. The revelation crashed over him. Madison had hired Leslie to orchestrate the accident that had nearly taken Laura's life. The two women had plotted a crime cloaked in betrayal. Jacob's mind reeled, but his training took over. He waited until the conversation ended, then quietly slipped away into the night to formulate a response. The next morning, with a badge in one hand and a heavy heart in the other, Jacob tracked Leslie to her modest apartment on the outskirts of town. He found her pacing, cigarette in hand, the tension of the previous night still etched across her face. When she opened the door and saw Jacob, panic flickered in her eyes. "We need to talk," Jacob said, his tone brokering no argument. Leslie tried to bluff, to divert, but it was useless. Jacob presented her with what he knew, piecing together the fragments from the conversation and his own observations from the past few weeks. When she realized the game was up, Leslie broke not with fear, but exhaustion. Her shoulders slumped and her defenses crumbled. She didn't resist when Jacob took her in. But what she revealed under questioning turned the entire case inside out. "She's my sister," Leslie confessed quietly, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Madison. We share the same father." The words hit Jacob like a storm. He stared at her, the pieces of a new puzzle forming in his mind. Madison and Leslie were not just partners in crime, they were bound by blood. This revelation added layers to the mystery. How deep did the conspiracy run? Why target Laura specifically? Jacob brought Madison in next. She was less cooperative. Her polished facade cracked only slightly under pressure. She admitted to knowing Leslie, but only as a distant acquaintance. When Jacob confronted her with Leslie's confession, Madison's composure faltered for a moment, but then she laughed sharp, cold, deflective. "Of course she'd say that," she said. "Anything to save herself." But Jacob wasn't laughing. He pressed further, pulling at the loose threads Madison had failed to hide. Slowly, a picture began to form, though it was still incomplete. Madison's connection to Leslie was real. That much was now indisputable. But the motive behind the attack on Laura remained buried under layers of deception. Jacob shifted his focus. If he couldn't get the truth directly from Madison, he'd find it elsewhere. He began digging into the sisters' shared history. Their father, Gregory Talbot, had been a powerful man, wealthy, secretive, and long deceased. Records indicated that Madison had grown up in privilege, while Leslie had lived on the fringes, largely ignored and unacknowledged. The resentment between them had festered for years before morphing into this dangerous alliance. What had driven them to target Laura? Jacob interviewed everyone in Laura's circle, but no one seemed to know of any connection between her and the Talbot family. Laura herself remained in a coma, unable to provide the missing piece. Her accident, engineered to look like a malfunction, had occurred late at night, on a deserted stretch of road. The timing, the planning, it had all been meticulous. And now, with both perpetrators in custody, the motive remained an enigma. Frustration mounting, Jacob turned to Laura's journals, letters, anything she had left behind that could offer insight. Her last entries hinted at suspicion. She'd written about a woman following her, shadowing her movements. She had been nervous, paranoid even, and believed someone from her past was watching. That clue opened another door. He traced Laura's college records, her former workplaces, even her adoption records until he struck a name: Catherine Talbot. Gregory's first wife, and the woman who had given up a child under murky circumstances. That child, as Jacob discovered through a buried court document, had been named Laura. The realization was devastating. Laura was a Talbot too. Unknowingly, she had grown up separated from her half-sisters, each one raised in a different world. Madison had inherited the estate. Leslie had inherited nothing. Laura had inherited only silence. And yet, something about Laura's quiet existence must have posed a threat to Madison, something worth silencing. Jacob's pulse raced as he connected the dots. Madison's motives weren't just personal. They were rooted in legacy, in inheritance, in identity. Laura, had she survived and discovered the truth, might have staked a claim to the Talbot fortune. She might have exposed the lies that Madison had spent her entire life guarding. But Madison wasn't working alone. Jacob knew that now. Leslie's involvement had layers. She wasn't just a hired hand. She had been coerced, manipulated by her sister with promises of recognition and revenge. Madison had pulled the strings, and Leslie had danced to a tune composed of childhood neglect and broken dreams. Still, the true heart of the conspiracy remained just out of reach. Why now? Why go after Laura so many years after their father's death? Why orchestrate a near-fatal accident when silence could have been bought more easily? Jacob posed these questions to Leslie during a second interrogation. She hesitated, clearly wrestling with a secret still unspoken. It wasn't just about the inheritance, she whispered. It was about what Laura knew. Jacob leaned in. What did she know? Leslie looked away. Madison never told me exactly. Only that if Laura remembered, everything would come crashing down. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Jacob realized Laura's memories, possibly suppressed, possibly locked behind trauma, held the key. And if Madison had feared that those memories would return, she had every reason to act before they did. He returned to the hospital, to Laura's bedside. He sat with her, watched her sleep, and whispered encouragement, hoping that somewhere inside, she could hear him. She stirred occasionally, her fingers twitching. The doctors were optimistic. Recovery was possible. And if Laura woke, everything would change. Meanwhile, Madison called in her lawyers. She denied all accusations, painted Jacob as overzealous, and the arrest as unlawful. The media caught wind of the scandal, and pressure mounted on Jacob to release her. With no concrete motive and no physical evidence linking Madison directly to the crime, his case was beginning to unravel. He needed more. More proof. More truth. And above all, he needed Laura to wake up before Madison found another way to finish what she had started. The night Laura stirred in her hospital bed, Jacob Hawthorne was seated quietly in the corner of the room, his eyes fixed on the subtle flickers of her eyelids. The moment was fleeting, but it was enough. Nurses rushed in, and a wave of cautious optimism swept through the corridors. Laura was waking up, and with her, the truth long buried in shadows was inching closer to the surface. Jacob didn't wait. The moment she was lucid, he began carefully, gently, trying not to overwhelm her. He asked about the weeks leading up to the crash, the anxiety she had documented in her journal, the presence she had felt tailing her. Laura's voice was faint but clear. She spoke of a memory she couldn't quite place off, a woman's face, eerily familiar, watching her at the university fundraiser weeks before the crash. At the time, Laura thought it was her imagination. But the look in the woman's eyes had burned into her. Laura believed she'd seen that woman before. Jacob showed her a picture of Leslie. Laura's hand trembled slightly. Her. That's her. She was there. That confirmed the stalking. But more troubling was the expression on Laura's face, a mixture of fear and a dawning realization. Something in her had shifted. She reached for Jacob's hand and whispered, "There's something else. I think I knew her. From before." Jacob urged her to keep digging through her memories. The next few hours were a floodgate. Laura remembered a fight between her adoptive parents when she was a child, an argument about a woman named Catherine and a girl she was never supposed to meet. She remembered a man visiting them once, a man with sharp eyes and a commanding presence. She hadn't understood then, but now the memory carried a name: Gregory Talbot. Laura's own origins had been veiled in secrecy, but now the veil was lifting. Jacob verified every thread Laura offered, and each one led back to Gregory. Madison, Leslie, and Laura, 3 daughters from different mothers, kept apart by wealth and design. But only one had been positioned to inherit everything. That inheritance was now Jacob's strongest angle. He traced the legal documents again, this time more thoroughly. What he uncovered changed the game. An unsigned codicil to Gregory's will that named Laura as the primary beneficiary, drafted shortly before his death. Madison had known. She must have discovered it after Gregory died, hidden it, and lived in fear ever since that the truth would emerge. Jacob now understood Madison's desperation. It hadn't just been about legacy, it had been about survival. If the codicil was made public, Madison's grip on the estate would be broken. Everything would pass to Laura. When Jacob confronted Madison with this, her mask cracked. Just for a moment. Her voice didn't waver, but her hands did. "There was no way to prove it," she said quietly. "It was just a draft. Not legal. Not binding. But real," Jacob pressed. Madison didn't respond. She turned her face away, her silence more damning than a confession. Meanwhile, Leslie, in custody and emotionally deteriorating, began to reveal more. Her story unfolded in layers of pain and resentment. She hadn't known about the codicil until recently. Madison had pulled her back into her life with promise of recognition, of money, of vengeance against the sister who had unknowingly stolen everything. "She said Laura never suffered like we did," Leslie sobbed. "She said Laura had it easy, but she didn't. None of us did." Jacob saw clearly now. Madison's manipulation of Leslie had been brutal, surgical. She had exploited Leslie's yearning for family, twisted it into a tool, and used her to try to erase Laura before the truth emerged. But now the truth was here. Laura, recovering slowly, was lucid enough to make her statement. Jacob helped her formalize it. He gathered the medical reports, the journal entries, Leslie's testimony, and the codicil. Still, the case remained perilous. Madison's lawyers were ruthless, and they knew exactly how to exploit gaps in the evidence. That's when Jacob made a choice. He went public. A press conference. A room packed with reporters. Jacob laid out the entire conspiracy, the attempted murder of Laura, the hidden codicil, the sisterly deception, the Talbot legacy scandal. It was a nuclear move, and it worked. Public opinion turned swiftly against Madison. Her support crumbled. Investors pulled out. Friends abandoned her. And Laura, the forgotten daughter, suddenly became the center of a media storm. It wasn't something she wanted. The cameras, the questions, the relentless curiosity, it overwhelmed her. But she stood strong, with Jacob by her side, and Leslie broken but trying, watching from a distance behind prison glass. The courts moved quickly. With Laura's testimony and Jacob's investigation, Madison was formally charged with conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of justice. Her assets were frozen, and the estate entered probate review. Leslie accepted a plea deal. She would serve time, but less than she expected. In court, she looked at Laura with tears in her eyes. "I didn't know who you were," she said. "Not really. I just wanted someone to blame." Laura nodded, not out of forgiveness, but acknowledgement. They were sisters, after all, whether by blood or by scars. Jacob, though victorious, remained unsettled. The Talbot name, once a symbol of power and wealth, had been reduced to a battleground of buried secrets and shattered women. He filed away the last of his reports and returned to his modest office, where the weight of the case lingered in the dust and silence. But he wasn't done. Laura, now the legal heiress, decided to dismantle the estate. She sold the mansion, donated the proceeds to foundations supporting orphaned youth and victims of domestic manipulation. She didn't want the Talbot legacy. She wanted to build her own. Leslie, from her prison cell, began to write letters, apologies, memories. She sent them to Laura weekly. Most went unanswered. But she kept writing anyway. It was the only thing she could do. And Madison, stripped of wealth and influence, awaited trial. Her last public statement was chilling in its brevity. I did what was necessary. No apology. No remorse. Just the echo of a woman who had spent her life controlling everything until everything controlled her. Jacob returned to the hospital one last time. Laura was walking now, slowly but steadily. She met him with a quiet smile. You believed me when no one else did, she said. Jacob shrugged. You remembered when no one else could. There was nothing more to be said. The gates had been opened, and everything behind them laid bare, ugly, raw, but finally understood. What had once been hidden was now light. And from that light, something new could begin. Jacob left without ceremony, slipping into the dusk like a shadow retreating into the earth, knowing the next case would come soon enough. But this one would haunt him for a long time. Some stories never end. They just wait to be reopened.